Hey, I'm Kat, mom of 3 and founder of Ritual, the company setting a new standard in the supplement industry. When I was pregnant, I remember staring at my prenatal vitamins and thinking, what's in this stuff? All I found were vitamins high in heavy metals and lacking in the very essential nutrients we need. So we scoured the world for the best quality ingredients, backed by clinical studies, third-party tested, and Ritual's Essential Prenatal was born. Join our family of skeptics with 40% off your first month when you visit ritual.com/podcast.
In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, and welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH, the podcast where we try to find out how things happen, try to break them down to their core, their foundation, and figure out how they came to be. This is episode number 86 coming at you. We are fully in the third year of this podcast, and that is mind-boggling even as I say it now. We are fully in the year 2024. This podcast started in 2022, January specifically. So the anniversary, I think, is actually January the 3rd, January the 2nd. But we are 2 years deep, and I found out how a lot of things have happened, and this podcast has morphed. The first few episodes, I would have never envisioned what it is now, and I can only imagine what it will be in the next couple years. The idea for this podcast as a whole, truthfully, is for it to be an umbrella for other possible creative endeavors, historical or just interesting, just different things. I mean, I like to tinker, and so I want to find different ways to continue to have new creative channels. So there will be possibly some new podcasts coming up in the next year or so. Doing some research on one right now. Can't get too deep into it, but I will say that I've been doing research on it for weeks now, and still there's more to be done. It's a severe undertaking is what it truthfully is. But enough about that. This episode is about the civil rights movement. We are going to cover pretty much the entire, I would say its entirety. Because the way this podcast works, we always go back. We always just go back before we go forward. So it's going to start right after the Civil War, because as I say in the podcast, we can't even talk about civil rights unless we talk about just briefly slavery, because slavery is that elephant in the room. It's that overarching, thing that's just like, this is how we got here, right? We didn't just stumble upon Jim Crow. We didn't stumble upon the 60s and the sit-ins and Dr. King. This happened because a country had enslaved a certain race of individuals and subjugated them and made them less than for hundreds of years, and then through a war they were freed and remained in that same country. That's what America is dealing with. That's what this podcast to me is here for. We can sit here and talk about the actual events until we're blue in the face, right? We can talk about Rosa Parks, which we covered on the last episode, which is great. I hope you guys check it out. Or Dr. King, or Malcolm X, or the Black Panthers, any of that stuff. And it's all great. It's all necessary, right? But the real question, or what really must be looked at, is the predicament itself. You have to zoom out, and like I said, see that this all comes from. Truthfully, that's why I think the New York Times made that documentary series of 16. Was it 1610? I think it's 1610, 1604, 16 something. Which is like the first year that Black people were brought, to America as slaves, and we're dealing with the reverberations of that moment. You could almost look at that as the Big Bang for American racism. Truthfully, you wonder how it would be, because I feel like the idea of racism has been taken and applied in a number of different ways. And maybe what I'm about to say is not true, but this is possibly what I think. I think that America developed its racism on Black people and then used it on other races. Kind of like, you learn a skill here at one job and take it to your next one, and now you're even better at it. Something like that. Just an idea. But we're gonna break it down. Let's see. Before we get to that, though, always, what am I watching? Okay, this is gonna sound a little weird, I think, but I watched a documentary about trees, and it was so good. It was amazing. I couldn't believe how much I was enjoying this documentary about trees. It's only about trees. So it's on Max. Let me find the name of it. I mean, it can't be that hard to find, because if you just Google tree documentaries, how many come up? You know what I mean? We're going to see Max tree documentary. It just talks about like the way they live and how important they are, and how kind of special they are. And I've never really thought about that. It's called Trees and Other Entanglements. Yeah, and I mean, I'll play a quick clip of the trailer for you right now.
Constant connection.
You can see why this tree is almost dead.
A lot of things have happened to it.
When I look out at the trees in my backyard, I think about time.
This tree has been alive longer than Nana and, definitely than you. This is a vine. It's gobbling everything up.
It's just like there's a war.
See what I mean? I mean, it's like, I've just never envisioned, I don't know, I didn't see that coming. It was just one random night I was sitting here and I was just like, you know what? I ain't got nothing else to do. But yeah, I would definitely check that out. If you're looking for something to watch. What am I listening to? I just listened to this book called, what is it? Not That Kind of Girl by Lena Dunham. Very good. Very good. I enjoy Lena Dunham as a person. I haven't looked at what she's been doing recently, but she was definitely a large part of my of growing up and like college. Because as I was telling a friend, for whatever reason in my mind, I sometimes, and this is, take this for what you will, it's not gender based in any way, but I see myself as like some sort of like waspy like white chick in like Manhattan, you know, or like on the Upper East Side. I just identify with that life. I don't know what that means. I don't think I should be a woman or anything. I'm not coming out, or it's not what this is, but there's a kinship that I feel when I look at those women live their lives, and I'm just like, I see that. I feel you. You know what I mean? And that's kind of the life that she lived. She just talks about it. It's made in 2014. She of course was the star of the show Girls. She's done some other things. Just a very interesting mind. You know, that we need certain people in the world to say things that make you question just society. And I feel like she's one of those people. And that's not really what the book is about. It's about her life. But because of those things that she's done, it makes her life interesting. But yeah, that's about enough rambling here. Before we get to the podcast, of course, find everything on htthappen.com. All the socials are htthappen. TikTok is htthappen22. Still posting a lot of the clips from there, as well as the mashup dance videos that I've just become in love with. I don't know what it is, folks. I'll tell you the honest truth. I just enjoy making them. I'm not even sure why. It's just like something I do in my spare time, and I'm just like, you know what? We're going to throw it up there too. So that's kind of what's happening. Wherever you find this, please give us 5 stars if you loved it, 2 stars if you didn't love it, and tell us why you didn't love it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. I don't think there's much else to say before we get to the pod. Yeah, hope you guys like it. And without further ado, as we know what to do, here is the episode.
Representing the rights and sovereignty of this state and its peoples.
This is the voice of Governor Wallace in 1963 as he's preventing the registration of 2 black students at the University of Alabama.
Of the University of Alabama, today of the might of the central government offers frightful example of the oppression of the rights, privileges, and sovereignty of this state by officers of the federal government.
That you are going to stand in that door?
This is Deputy U.S. Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach.
Resist us from doing so. Is that correct?
I stand upon the statement.
Stand upon that statement. Governor, I'm not interested in a show. I don't know what the purpose of the show is. I am interested in the orders of these courts being enforced. That is my only responsibility here. On the campus. They have a right to be here, protected by that court order. They have a right to register here. It is a simple problem, scarcely worth this kind of attention in my judgment.
The civil rights movement, right? That's what we're here to talk about. But we're going to, of course, as is customary with this podcast, we have to talk about the things that happened before the civil rights movement to really give even that its due. Because truthfully, you could gloss over the civil rights movement, in a 1 page, in a paragraph, and it's done in quite a few textbooks. People were oppressed and they wanted better rights. I don't know why I sound like a rap song right now, but and then the guy comes along, Dr. King comes along and says, "We won't ride the bus no more," and then and all of a sudden progress. But there's a lot more to it. But even that wouldn't give you you wouldn't feel the true gravitas that I think is necessary when discussing things of this nature without talking about what happened before. And of course that is slavery. But really, slavery is its own conversation. And of course we've covered slavery. I think it was in episode 72. If you want to go back and check it out, the transatlantic slave trade, we broke it down If you want anything you wanted to know about that time, I think hopefully we covered it. But really, it's the after, right? It's what directly happens after slavery, or even what happens to end slavery. Of course, we're talking about the Civil War, right? You get the Civil War. You get basically two parts of the same country. The South breaks off, and they fight each other over, depending on who you discuss it with, differing reasons as to why they were fighting. But one of the main things that ends up happening, regardless of why they were fighting, is at the end of it, slavery is over. Cue Emancipation Proclamation, cue Juneteenth. And so what we have here is our country, which was not just very recently two different countries who had very different ideas about how to proceed, are now back as one country with the oppressed party now thrust into society. Literally thrust. You could say, I mean, even as a, as a black person, as a black man, I mean, they did kind of just push. Now, granted, I mean, however you want to say it, they did kind of just push, black people out, and not push them out and be like, hey, all right, well, there you go. Now we just got black people now, here we are. And that's what we'll find when you get into Reconstruction. We almost envisioned a world that was more what you would think. I don't know. When I first learned about Reconstruction and realized how progressive they had tried to be in those first few years after the Civil War, I was blown away. It was like reading about aliens, because I didn't there were black senators in like 1870, and I'm going to tell you about a couple of them. I think the first ever member of Congress, African American member of Congress, is a man by the name of Hiram R. Revels. I hope I'm getting that right. He was born free in North Carolina, but ended up being, I guess, having something to do with Mississippi, and so he was elected by the state legislature of Mississippi to represent them. I believe he was a representative, not a senator. I could be wrong. Let me just try to get it right here. Okay, no, it's saying Senate. Yes. Okay, so he was also the first elected, or the first congressman, but he was also a senator. Even more than that. This was 1870. We're talking 4.5 years after our country just finished fighting each other to say we're not even sure if black people should even be free. 4.5 years later, one of them is a senator. Like, when you think about that, if you don't know history, you would almost believe it didn't happen. It's very easy to do that. Or, I was just, like I said, I was so surprised. And he wasn't the only one. Right after him, because of course we said he was the first, we get a man by the name of Blanche Bruce. Right? Blanche Kelso Bruce. What kind of name is that? Like, he's got two names from, well, really, okay, this guy's got three names that are all already famous, right? Blanche, right? Golden Girls, right? Kelso, that 70s show. And then Bruce, I mean, I'm thinking Bruce Willis. I don't know about you. Like, that's quite the name you have there, Mr. Bruce. Blanche Kelso Bruce, BKB, if we may be so personal. So this guy, he was actually born into slavery in Farmville, Virginia, which is not too far from where this podcast is recorded. He taught school as well as worked as a steamboat porter on the Mississippi River before getting into politics. And I just mention these guys because I think you have to talk about the history before what's considered, I don't know, it's not even modern history now, but I think the people want to talk about civil rights as if it just started. I think, in the 20th century. To me, it started in the 19th century, and it started with what happened in order for us to get here. The war first off had to be won. The North had to win the war, or we're not even having this conversation. Straight up. So, I mean, there's certain things that have to happen before we can even get to the civil rights movement, right? And then you have to then free the slaves. You have to then have Reconstruction. Reconstruction has to fail. That's the point of mentioning it, because Reconstruction, and I think I glossed over it in the last episode without, it didn't work out. There's a reason why it took a long time. I forget the years. Let me see. I saw there were years after, before there would be an actual black senator after Hiram Revels, because I don't know, the world wasn't ready. It was essentially like when you have like a breakup or something with like your girlfriend or something like that, or your boyfriend, whichever way you swing, however they identify, and you guys you've been fighting at it, you've been fighting for a while, and then you decide you're gonna get back together, right? And then you get back together and you're all doing like way too much to like make it seem like you're like not still mad about like what happened. So you're making like black senators from Mississippi out of nowhere and stuff like that, I feel like that's what Reconstruction really was. It was America doing too much to try to get back in the good graces of either side, because it was a lot. I mean, imagine, thousands of people. Let's look it up right now and see how many people died in the Civil War. Take a guess before I tell you. How many people died in the Civil? I'm typing really slow. Sorry. What do you think? I have the number. 620,000 people. 620,000 people died. Now, no matter which way you feel about slavery, that number is probably going to bother you, right? That's something that's going to stick with you. That's why I say it's wild that 4.5 years later we get our first black senator. So yeah, I mean that's the main part of Reconstruction I wanted to get to. I think there's something we could probably. I don't know if there's anything else I wanted to mention. I mean, Reconstruction really ends in the late 1870s into the early 1880s. Is really when they it was about a 15-year effort when they were like, all right, what are we doing? Because what really happens is it's almost down. I mean, I said 15. It's more like 10 years, and then federal troops withdraw from the South. Because directly after the Civil War, the troops stayed around to kind of make, be like, hey, you Southern guys, don't lose your mind here, kind of keep it together. Here, Leroy, Jedediah, don't get too crazy. And then after 10 years, they were just, they went back to doing what they were doing. And that's really when we get to see the Southern whites kind of come back and try to reclaim a version of what they had. A little bit of Winn-Dixie, if you will, right? A little bit of Gone with the Wind. Before Gone with the Wind. I mean, it's what leads to Gone with the Wind. When they start to romanticize the Civil War and so on and so forth from there. But that's, like we said, we see the end of Reconstruction around then, 1870, 1880. Specifically ends with the contested election between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel J. Tilden. Hayes would end up coming out the victor. But like I said, that would be when the federal troops would leave, and that's when things would kind of get a little hairy down in the South. We're going to jump forward a couple years to the 1908 Springfield race riots. This was a number of events of mass racial violence that was committed against African Americans by a mob of about 5,000 Americans and European immigrants in Springfield, Illinois. This happened between August 14th and August 16th in 1908. So what happened was there were two black men who were arrested as suspects in the rape and murder of what seems to be two young white women and one of the fathers of them. Now, we seem to just see this over and over and over again. Time and time again. I mean, literally, we were talking about, if you're listening to the last episode, the Scottsboro Boys. It's still fun to say. But I played you out. If you listened to the episode and you somehow cut out before it all ended, go back, because I played the last little bit that explained all of what happened to them, their fates, right? And if you don't know, brief recap of the Scottsboro Boys, they were I think it was 9 or 10 black men. I forget where they were at, but they were also had been accused of raping these two white women. And they were put in jail. They were put in jail for years and years and years, and eventually went to the Supreme Court, and it got overturned. And they were released. But once they were released, some of these guys literally, I think one of them committed suicide. I mean, not to just, I think one of them ended up killing his wife. I think some of them went back to jail. Some of them just disappeared. It was a lot. I mean, but imagine going through something that traumatic at that young of an age. But still, so this is where we are now. The Springfield race riots that happened for about the same reason as we're saying. So a mob seeking to lynch the men discovered the sheriff had transferred them out of the city. The whites furiously spread out to attack black neighborhoods. They murdered black citizens on the street and destroyed black businesses and homes. The state militia was called out to quell the rioting.
Sister took us and we went over here at the railroad, here on 19th Street, and got up in the boxcar. And till they called the militia out. I just prayed for an Indian to come up there and back up there and pull us away somewhere.
And so that was just an example of, we could go into, and I mean, I will direct you to, if you really want the nitty gritty, some stuff that you'll probably have to take a break in reading. There's a book called The Red Record. Let me pull it up, make sure I'm getting it, because I'm going to tell you the author as well. And it is, I say that to say, there's not a real reason to go into all of the atrocities that happened during the early 20th century against black people, because it's pretty well known. I'm not going to be the guy that sits here and tells you, as if it's something to be learned. But what I will say, if you want a story, if you want to know, kind of what maybe I know, The book's called The Red Record. It's written by a woman named Ida B. Wells, and it's about it's basically a gathering of statistics of the lynchings in the South from 1892 to for a few years. And I read it a couple years ago, and it is, I mean, if you care for humanity, it's really bleak and it's really sad. But it's not trying to be flamboyant. It's not fiction. It's not a tale. It's just her writing about what happened in a way that, similar to what I'm talking about, not in any way about the book that I'm talking about writing is, she's just writing about what happened. Sometimes when what happened is so profound, that's all you have to do. And just check that out. But so yeah, we're gonna jump all through that and jump up to I'd say about 1944, right? We're gonna go with the Supreme Court case of Smith v. Allwright, right? That ended up prohibiting white primaries. This is really when we get into like the Jim Crow, like the poll taxes and stuff like that. They really made it difficult for black people as well as poor whites to have any sort of voice, I guess you could say, any sort of control. And they did that through different state constitutions, is where they did a lot of this, because states' rights really, are still, kings. They were making a lot of rules that were disenfranchising African Americans, and as I said, many poor whites as well. They were creating barriers to voter registration. And so, like most things, we see that, like I mentioned on the last podcast, you can change these laws, right? You can change the laws, but you can't change the people. The people don't change with the stroke of a pen. The people don't change because a man in a robe in D.C. with a nice pen wrote on some nice paper about what nice people are supposed to do. They continue to live their lives, and that's kind of what happened here. As I mentioned with the segregation, they passed the law. I'm not gonna lie, 54, 64, one of those. And they didn't really get it implemented until the 70s. And that's because those states that hadn't done it yet, they were going to lose their federal funding if they hadn't done it. And so I say that to say that continued throughout the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, even after passing, or even after the Supreme Court said what they said about prohibiting white primaries. And so I mentioned Jim Crow not too long ago, and I want to just cover that a little bit before we jump into the next parts of the civil rights movement. I think the next part we're going to cover after Jim Crow is going to be the sit-ins, kind of the first non-violent protests that we see that kind of emerge all across the country. We'll see that they are in a lot of different places. But so Jim Crow, I'll say I was probably honestly not paying attention in school when they were really covering this, and they probably didn't cover it for that long. So I didn't know much about it. So they said the first time people really even talk about Jim Crow, it's hard to really say, but I would say it's, from what I'm reading, is right around the 1820s, 1830s, which I didn't know that. I assumed that Jim Crow had come about somewhere around, the early 20th century. But it comes from a song called Jump Jim Crow.
Mean to say, but there are so many gals I couldn't get away. Wheel about and turn about and do just so. Every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow.
It's a song and dance caricature of black people that was performed by a white actor named Thomas Rice, in blackface, of course, because it says in 1828. He's just shoe polishing it up. Jump Jim Crow. And so as a result of that, Jim Crow became a pejorative expression meaning Negro. Like, you know what I mean? Kind of, that old Jim Crow. I honestly thought, for whatever reason, I'll be honest, that Jim Crow, while I knew what it was about, like I knew that it was bad for black people, I just assumed Jim Crow was a white guy. I don't know why I did that. I'm just being completely honest. But yeah, so it was basically a nickname for Negroes. And so when they passed laws for with racial segregation, they would call them Jim Crow laws. And so quite a few southern states, or former Confederate states, if you want to think about it, they ended up passing what are known as Jim Crow laws. And so now we'll come to all the different versions of sit-ins that there were. And the first one that we'll start with happened right outside of Washington, D.C., in the city of Alexandria, Virginia. It is the Alexandria Library sit-in. On August 21st, 1939, 5 well-dressed young black men entered the Alexandria Library one by one. William Evans, Edward Gaddis, Morris Murray, Clarence Strange, cool name, Otto L. Tucker. They each politely requested a library card, and when each was refused a card by the librarian, each walked to a shelf, grabbed a book, and sat down at a table. They sat at separate tables and did not speak to one another. The librarian, Catherine Scoggins, ran to the city hall to inform the city manager of what was happening. Oh my gosh, these little black kids trying to read. Tucker called the media, and over 300 spectators watched police escort the 5 men from the building. Photographers from both white and black newspapers were also present to record the scene. So this, and I didn't know that sit-ins went back this far. I truthfully thought that it was something that maybe got cooked up in the 50s, maybe the 40s. We're talking 1939. We're talking like the same year that like Hitler invaded Poland. Like, I didn't know it went that far back. Very impressive. And it is, I mean, it's wild. This woman was just runs to like the government, is like, these kids, they want a library card. Like, you know what I mean? Like one of the most nonviolent things you could probably do. I don't know. So that's just one. I mentioned that one first. We're not going to cover all of them. I have a few of them here in my notes, and they will be on the website. But I just thought that was cool because that was the first one. Okay, so the next one that we're going to talk about is the Greensboro sit-in, which is really the one I think that in my head is what I think of, and maybe what you think of when you think of sit-ins. Like the first one that I just mentioned, that was really cool. Like I said, I didn't know about that one. But the one I'm going to tell you about now happened in 1960. It will be the one that would kind of be the catalyst for all the ones that would kind of go on throughout the South. And it happens at a segregated Woolworths. Woolworths. Let me pull it up. I have it right here. Why mispronounce it if we have it? Woolworths. And if you'll remember, interestingly enough, we cover Woolworths in the first episode of How Did That Happen? Because it's about Dollar Trees. I don't know, just a little blast from the past right there. So the counter is segregated, right? 4 young black men, Ezel Blair Jr.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Okay, round 2. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Oh, Ezel. David Richmond, Franklin McCain, and Joseph McNeil are all students at North Carolina A&T, and they want to sit at this counter. They plan their protest carefully and actually enlisted the help of a local white businessman, Ralph Johns. On February the 1st, 1960, the 4 students sat down at the lunch counter at the Woolworths in downtown Greensboro, where the official policy was to refuse service to anyone but whites. That's the official policy. Someone wrote that in a book.
We purchased small items, sundry items, to establish the fact that we were customers.
This is Joseph McNeil, one of the Greensboro 4.
And then we sat down on this stool and asked for a cup of coffee. And the store manager told us that he wasn't going to serve us. The local establishment grossly underestimated our anger and the ability to hang in there.
Denied service, the 4 young men refused to give up their seats. They're on their Rosa Parks stuff, but they're trying to get some food. So, of course, the police arrive at the scene, but they're unable to take action due to lack of provocation. These guys are just sitting down, which also, in Rosa Parks' situation, did not stop them from arresting her. By that time, Johns, the white guy who helped him out, had already alerted the local media, who had arrived in full force to cover the events on television. The Greensboro 4 stayed put until the store closed and then returned the next day with more students from local colleges.
They said, "Hey, boys, what you going to do?" We said, "Well, we're going to come back, and we're going to keep coming back until you decide to serve us."
By February the 5th, remember this started on the 1st, some 300 students had joined the protest at Woolworths, paralyzing the lunch counter and other local businesses. They got heavy TV coverage. By the end of March, literally the next month, this had spread to 55 different cities in 13 different states. Though other people had been arrested for trespassing, disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, all the above. But it definitely got, the conversation started. In response to this, dining facilities across the South were beginning to be integrated by the summer of 1960. But what happened, because Woolworths just they did it so slickly. They did it when everyone went on summer vacation that summer. So other places were doing it, April, May. They did it like June or July, and everyone came back to school and was like, oh, now we can sit here. Oh, that's an odd change. And so that, I thought, that's an interesting piece. We're trying, like I said, I'm trying to piece it all together. We're going to, like I said, we started with Reconstruction, started with the Civil War, just a quick, kind of get you there, kind of explain what's going on. We talked about the late 19th century, and now we're here. In the early 20th century, we talked about the race riots. We talked about Supreme Court decisions. We talked about sit-ins. And now I'll give you a brief overview of the NAACP and how it kind of came to be. That, of course, is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. This was formed in 1909 as an interracial endeavor to advance justice for African Americans. The original founders were people like W.E.B. Du Bois, Mary White Ovington, Moorfield Story, that's a heck of a name, and our friend Ida B. Wells, who we said wrote the Red Record. And so the race riots of 1908, which we just mentioned not too long ago, were actually one of the catalysts to make them feel as if they needed to make this organization exist. And even though it is called the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, there were actually white people that were on the initial, founding board, if you will. Henry Moskowitz, William English Walling. And like I mentioned with the Red Record, one of the main things that the NAACP was trying to do when they first came to power was to try to stop the lynching of black Americans throughout the South. They would go out to fight that for years, for the next 30 years or so after their founding, to, get some legislation on the books that would actually, because you can't, and I tell people this all the time in my field of work, you can't prosecute what doesn't exist. You know what I mean? If there's not a law that says you can't do it, you can't tell someone you can't take someone to jail for not doing it. And it's the same thing here. I mean, if you haven't made lynching illegal, then they're not really breaking a law, as disgusting as that may be. It's the truth. And so some people would say the largest success of the NAACP would be the Brown v. Board of Education court decision. I have a little bit of that I'm going to cover in a little bit, but right before we get to that, what I'm going to tell you about, just to kind of keep with, because we're going to get out of the 40s and kind of go ahead and get into the 50s, into the 60s. But the last thing of the 40s, similar to the library sit-in, I didn't know that the first Freedom Riot happened in 1947. I thought that this was something that also got cooked up late 50s, early 60s, but no. There were 16 men from the Congress of Racial Equality, 8 white and 8 black guys. They would actually go on the first Freedom Riot. They planned to visit 15 cities. Evidently, there were some other guys there as well, a bunch of other people, but they were, the orchestrators were the first 16 ones that I told you about. At least is the way the literature makes it seem. They planned to visit 15 cities in Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Starting in Washington, D.C., they went through Richmond and stopped in Petersburg. The following day, they passed through Raleigh and arrived in Durham. And so really what they do is they ride through these southern states, and they blatantly break the laws of segregation. The black only section, white only section. They will put white people in the front or in the back, black people in front, just to break the law. And for some, in some states they don't mind as much, in other states they do. They end up getting arrested. I'm not sure which state it was. Let's see. They go through a couple. It says here on April 14th they were arrested, but it doesn't say where. Let's see. Hillsborough. It says Hillsborough. Who knows where Hillsborough is? I'm assuming, is that in North Carolina? Maybe. Because they were actually, some of the guys were convicted of, not getting up or sitting in the wrong section. Isn't it crazy that we used to be in a part of society where that was a law? Imagine. It doesn't exist now. Even at like sporting events where you pay for seats, you're not going to put anybody in jail because they were sitting in your seat. You're just going to get a guy, at the most you get him thrown out. You know what I mean? But that's if he's being belligerent. More than likely, he's just telling him to move. But we were so, I don't know what this says about America at that time, that we were so fixated on, not just race alone, but just down to seats. Jeez. And so that would, of course, be the catalyst for, that would kind of start all the other freedom rides that we begin to know about to come about 10 to 12 years later. What we're going to do is I have some footage of the Freedom Rides from the 60s that we're going to get to in a second, but to kind of try to go in a little bit of a chronological order, I just want to cover Brown v. Board really fast, kind of lay it down so you guys can understand how important this actually is in the timeline, the through line of the civil rights movement. So basically, before Brown v. Board, we had Plessy v. Ferguson, right? And Plessy v. Ferguson happened, I think, in 1896. I want to say it's a Supreme Court decision that basically says segregation is fine as long as the institutions that are being segregated are both equally, they're equal. They're both, they're counterparts. They're equal counterparts, whatever it is they're doing. The schools must look the same. Then that's fine. You can keep white kids over here, black kids over here, as long as they're getting the exact same education. You can have black water fountains, white water fountains, as long as they're the exact same thing. Now, as we mentioned before with laws, that sounds good in theory, but hardly ever in practice. And so that's what we see is the white schools, the white whatever have you, are always going to be the better option, right? They're not equivalent in any way to the black options that are being offered to people in the South. When Brown v. Board comes along in 1950, I think the issue happens in 51. The decision is in 54. But basically, this little girl was unable to go to the white school that was by her house, and had to go to the black school, I believe it was. The separate but equal, all that good stuff. And they went to the Supreme Court and decided that, hey, this is not okay. So they decided, and that was a big thing. So for 50 years, and once again, we have to realize, once to go back to what we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, 1896 is only 30 years after the Civil War. So we had made a Supreme Court decision about what was actually fair and just about a specific people who had only recently been freed. So at some point, you'd have to reapproach it. You would think, right? I mean, I'm sure that's not what the white people of society at that time wanted to do, but that's what happened. And so that ends up giving us no longer is it separate but equal. Now things must be integrated. There, everyone has to share in all of the same things. I just wanted to mention that here before we get up to the actual Freedom Rides themselves in 61, because we would be, remiss if we just didn't at least cover it a little bit. I just feel like it's so understood, or not. I mean, I feel like it is. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I wonder how many people, if you were to ask, I mean, you wouldn't expect them to know maybe the actual legal decision, but I wonder how much of the story they actually know. That'd be interesting to ask just the public, maybe just, food for thought. When you're out in your life, they were asking everybody about the Roman Empire, whatever it was the last few weeks and months. Ask people if they know how schools got integrated and just see what kind of crazy yarn they start to spin. But yeah, so the first Freedom Ride began on May the 4th, 1961, was led by Corps Director James Farmer. There were 13 young riders, 7 black, 6 white, including but not limited to John Lewis, Genevieve Hughes, Mae Francis, Joseph Perkins, Charles Person, and a whole slew of others. Their plan was to ride through Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and they were to end in Louisiana, specifically New Orleans. Now, as you would think, as we kind of mentioned with the last group, the states they're riding through are not going to be loving the idea of their presence, to put it lightly. They would even, I would say, they would revel in trying to make their existence as difficult as possible while they were residing in their states. Their tactic, the Freedom Riders, while they were riding, the idea was to have at least one interracial pair sitting in adjoining seats, and at least one black rider sitting up front, where seats were under segregation had been reserved for white customers by local custom throughout the South, like we talked about with the one that happened in 47. They didn't really have too much trouble in Virginia and North Carolina, but if you can remember, North Carolina is where the other Freedom Riders had their issues. They ran into some issues in South Carolina, as well as Jackson, Mississippi.
We could see the bus station. Looked like at least 200 people were around the bus station, all men.
They were calling us all kind of names, nigger lovers, communists. Come on out and integrate Alabama. We dare you to do this, we dare you to do that.
The men began to come closer and surround the bus completely. They were saying, let's kill these niggers on this bus, these nigger lovers.
The Aniston clan had it all worked out. They had one of their members lie down in front of the bus. They were puncturing tires, they were breaking windows. They wanted to make sure that bus couldn't leave before they could surround it and do whatever they wanted to do.
This is audio footage from a documentary, either a documentary or a movie called Freedom Riders. I found it on YouTube the other day, and it is the full, their recounting of what happened, that or not that day, but throughout the time. I think they spent a few weeks on this trip. But once they got to the Deep South, basically everywhere they went, people were not very happy to see them.
I watched as a man raised his arm above the crowd with a crowbar, and he broke out one of the back windows of the bus.
You could hear him say, throw it in, and asking, where is the gas, where is the gas?
The hand went down, and when it came back up, it had some object in it that he threw into that hole.
And there was immediate flash fire on the bus.
Pretty soon the whole back of the bus was black. You couldn't even see in front of your face.
So I ran up to the front of the bus and I tried to open the door. Only thing I could hear is, let's burn them niggas. Let's burn them niggas alive.
And it cannot go unstated that this is simply because of where they chose to sit on a bus.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
No one mentioned anyone's mother. No one made a threat of death of any kind, of assault, bodily harm in any way. No one said, when we get there, you better watch out because of what we're gonna do. No, all they wanted to do, and they knew, which is why these freedom rides are so, they're so poignant. They're not poignant. They are very pertinent to the current time, and they knew this. They knew that all you have to do is provoke these people by just being civilized, and they will lose their mind. Like they said, when they pulled into some of these towns, the Klan would lay down in front of the bus so that they couldn't go anywhere. They were stopping them so that they could harass them, just because they're not sitting where they want them to sit. Just because a black person is sitting beside a white person, or a black person is sitting in the front of the bus while a white person might be in the back of the bus. Oh my gosh, let's set the whole town on fire. I just feel like, we talk about this, and it's instrumental in trying to figure out why or how this stuff happened is to really look at what was happening. You can't, you can watch these black and white videos until you're blue in the face, and you see these, they turn the hoses on them, they put the dogs on them, and it's vicious, it's horrible, but and there really is no but to that. But you have to look at the simplicity of all they were trying to accomplish. They were just trying to, in most cases, just have the basic rights that are guaranteed under the Constitution of America. I want to go to school, right? I want to have a home. I want to have a job. I want to vote. I want to, when I get off work, if I have to ride the bus, I want to be able to get on the bus and, have a seat, regardless of what I look like. Not crazy, not overly ambitious requests, I just think it has to be, you have to go back and sometimes state the obvious. This is all about people's choices in where they sat on the bus. That's what made them so mad. You can look at, there's not much else that you can look at and say there really wasn't anything else. They didn't, like I said, they didn't come in there and provoke anybody. They didn't wake up that day and choose violence. You can look at all these different protests that happened in the civil rights movement, and that is what is so profound about the movement itself. Because what white people have always been afraid of, I feel like, and I think this is very true, is that at some point black people will get mad enough and turn around and do to them what they did to black people for so many years, for hundreds of years. I think that is a true fear in bigoted white people that exist in America. I don't think it's every white person's fear, no. Because if you're realistic about life, you're just like, no, nobody wants that. Nobody's trying to do that. But there's this thing of what you do. It's like this. It's like this. And this is why, if I'm ever in a fight, I don't bring weapons to a fight. Okay? Because let's say you bring a bat to a fight, and you beat somebody, right? You're beating them with that bat. Then something happens. Tables turn. They got the bat. They're fully within what we would consider to be fair and equality to just start wailing on you with that bat, right? The same way you were doing with them. This bat, in a sense, is slavery and oppression, just for any people who haven't picked up the metaphor. And that's what white people have been afraid of. This going to happen to them for the last 150 years. And that's what you find is the fear, and even the seat choices on a bus is how we get here. And we're gonna move on a little bit. I think I want to play a little bit more from this because this definitely go check it out, guys. It's on YouTube. It's called Freedom Riders. It's about an hour and a half long. They interview all the people that were there. John Lewis is in it. Everything. But just a little bit more of that, and we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next part of this segment.
When I got off the bus, a man came up to me, and I'm coughing and strangling. He said, "Boy, you all right?" And I nodded my head, and the next thing I knew, I was on the ground. He had hit me with part of a baseball bat.
Just can't imagine. Just can't imagine. That's why it's good to hear from the words, specifically, because I can't always convey to you just exactly how horrific some of this stuff is. So those are the Freedom Riders, and we've covered pretty extensively, like Dr. King, RFK, JFK. We've even done a BSB on Malcolm X. It was about 30 episodes ago, but we have done one. So I'm going to jump over kind of the stuff that's specifically in that 60s decade that I feel like is always touched upon. We will talk about the riots. There were some riots that happened in the mid 60s, specifically the Watts riot and the Harlem riots. So there's two things of where kind of what we talked about just now about the unrest. The fact that you, at some point, if you continue to oppress a certain subsect of people, they will eventually rise up. That's what's always been, like I said, the white people's fear, and it's happened in certain cases, but never to the level that it would ever, there would ever be any sort of national uprising. But that's what you find when you talk about things like the Harlem Riot of 1964, which occurred over the death of a 15-year-old man or child named James Powell. Now, Powell was shot and killed by Police Lieutenant Thomas Gilligan in front of Powell's friends and about a dozen other witnesses. Right after the shooting, about 300 students from Powell School, they rallied, and this kind of started to set off 6 consecutive nights of rioting that affected the New York City neighborhoods of Harlem and Bedford-Stuy. Around 4,000 New Yorkers participated in the riots, which led to attacks on the NYPD, looting, vandalism, all the stuff that comes with rioting. One person died during this, 118 were injured, and 465 were arrested. And then the very next year, we get the Watts riots, 1965. And they also emanate from an issue with the police.
6 days of rioting in a Negro section of Los Angeles left behind scenes reminiscent of war-torn cities. More than 100 square blocks were decimated by fire and looters, and few buildings were left intact. Firemen were harassed by snipers and brick-throwing hoodlums as they attempted to control the fires, many of which were left to burn themselves out.
But we have to ask ourselves, why were they rioting in the first place, right? Well, this is because on August the 11th, 1965, 21-year-old Marquette Fry was pulled over for drunk driving by the California Highway Patrol. Now, that's obviously his fault. That's a problem, right? But once he gets pulled over, they want to impound his vehicle. He's actually not too far from his house, so his family shows up at the scene. Right, his mom's there. I think his brother's there. They start to manhandle Mr. Fry, throwing him into the car really violently. I think even some of his family gets beat up because they try to get into, they get in the middle and say, maybe stop hurting, my son or my brother, so much. And they also get, beat up by the cops. People are all watching this as this is happening. That the scene is just growing and growing and growing. And everyone is watching the mistreatment that they're receiving at the hands of the California Highway Patrol, the CHIPs. And this, you could say, is that enough reason to do what they did? Because I think over 30 people died in the Watts riots. It's just indicative of what they were all feeling. You know what I mean? I mean, it boils over at some point, and that's what I think was happening there. That's what you find all throughout the 60s. Is there are riots that happen. I mean, we talked about, if you can go back because I have better numbers in the actual episode about MLK's assassination, or when he dies, there are riots all across the country. Something like 30 people all across the nation die that day or like the next day because of race riots. I mean, I think there was one in Louisville. I mean, it's so sad. It's if I can remember correctly, there was a couple who owned a store, and like they were rioting because of the death of Martin Luther King, and he accidentally shot his wife, but blamed it on the looters, and then I think he himself also got shot later. I think by the police. Look that, fact check me if you want, but I know that there's definitely, I think, 1 or 2 deaths that happened in MLK in the wake of MLK's assassination. Then I'm pretty sure that's pretty close to the story. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about a lot of bad stuff, right? And of course, not even the full breadth of the civil rights movement. I mean, I thought about doing a part 2 for this episode, but I just feel like I don't know if it's necessary. I wanted to get it in because we're covering this 40s to 70s series, and it would just be weird if we didn't just mention the strides that were made in civil rights. But to me, the civil rights movement, while it's truthfully still going today, but I think you could say it culminates, I think, or at least, yeah, we'll say that, with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, right? And that's one of the bigger things that I think comes out of the civil rights movement. A lot of people die, but there's a little bit of progress that's made. And what you get with that, of course, is more benefits for the black community. And this was something that a lot of people were against. And truthfully, it's hard to believe that LBJ was 100% for it, because even what I've been told, or not been told, but from the documentaries that I watch, it seems like these presidents, with the exception of JFK, were not trying to be civil rights activists in any way. They weren't trying to be on the good side. They weren't necessarily on the bad side. It was more just like, it's not my issue because they're not black, or then they can't understand the plight. They said the same thing about Eisenhower. Eisenhower did not want to deal with the civil rights movement. It landed on his desk because that's what was happening in America. They prohibited discrimination in public accommodations and federally funded programs, which is a big deal because basically that's saying that if the national government, the federal government is giving you money to build something or do something to create something, you can't segregate that now, even if it's in a place where segregation is normally the status quo. That just can't happen. It basically hastened the end of Jim Crow because it would lead into the Voting Rights Act, which would come right after that, and it provided for direct federal intervention to enable African Americans to register and vote. It banned all the tactics that had been used in Jim Crow, and they were finally finding a way to get at the source of the problem. And that's what I feel like that's what everybody was working for. What you find when you look at the civil rights movement is you see that people there were actual causes and effects. People were able to affect change in their environment because things were so dire. And I think that's something that is not as, I don't know, if you look at where they were coming from, I think you would do the same thing too. If you look at those shanty houses, or the idea of sundown towns, which if you're not familiar, is just a town that, by sundown, all black people have to be out of it, right? Or you will have big problems, cue the red record, maybe a lynching or two, something like that. I mean, the fact that if you live in a world where that is the norm, it's only logical that at some point people will flip it on its head. And that's why I feel like we mentioned, that's why it was the chickens were coming home to roost for white America, and I think it was very difficult for them to understand that, and they were scared. I mean, because the writing was on the wall, only because it's civil. They would never ask for anything more than just what's civil. The rights that the same American citizens that they are, is guaranteed to them. They just want it, for them, for their family. All right, that was the civil rights movement, a very integral part of the 40s to 70s series that we are finishing up here. And how did that happen? I hope you guys liked it. Like I said, there's a lot that you could talk about with the civil rights movement. I mean, you could literally, each one of these events could be its own episode. And part of me wants to do that, or wanted to do that, but there's, I guess, no one to hold them and no one to fold them. And when is too much. So trying to keep it light and allow us to cover all these things without getting bogged down in the specifics of what happens in every single event. But yeah, I hope you guys liked it. Don't think there's much else to say. We're going to have another episode. We got another Israel Hamas episode coming up next on the How Did That Happen. It'll be a part 4, I believe. And I mean, that's the fact that war is still going on in itself. I didn't imagine that it would be this far. I really didn't. We're over 20,000 people have died now, and I don't know. You have to wonder what I don't understand. And it's just real quick before we get out of here is why there hasn't been a more concerted effort by Israel to get the hostages back. I just don't get it. And I think the people that live in Israel are also just not understanding that either. And where do you go from here? Like I've said before in this podcast, how many dead Palestinians equate to 1,200 dead Jewish people? Is a question that the world is figuring out, is trying to understand, and Israel does not seem to know. But like I said, we will talk about that on the next How Did That Happen? That'll be part 4, coming at you guys. But yeah, find all the extras over at htthappen.com, at htthappen for all the socials, at htthappen22 for the TikTok. Give us 5 stars if you like this, 2 stars if you didn't like it. Tell us why you didn't like it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. But yeah, we'll see you guys next week with the next BSB.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.